This is good. Do you have any way with all those dials and buttons to tell what volume is being recorded?
Yeah,
I don't think my hearing is that bad.
the volume is. Hello? Well, that's sure.
Okay. You don't have the source. How about you, James? Can you get back to the video and see if we're, I just switched the microphone. And I would like people to, if they can hear.
Yeah, there's about a 30-second lag, so.
Yeah, which is fine. If people project, because I'm using this microphone, I don't know why that would work. I actually do think that that's kind of what happened last time is we ended up using the microphone on this because we were getting some feedback or some echoing going on. So I don't think it works well together, the newest technology and then this. Hillary, can you hear us at all? And is there anything getting out on?
No, I can hear you fine. I'm happy. I'm listening. I'm waiting.
Okay. So it's just the YouTube.
If we're able to record, we should probably just move it back.
Yeah, we can post the recording. All right.
All right, so everyone has a chance to see the minutes from the last meeting and to adopt the agenda for today, so I will ask for a motion on that. For a second? Thank you. Okay, at this time, we're going to take some public comments, and that would be from the folks on the side here. We have a few minutes that we can do that. Make sure you speak up nice and loud because of our technical situation here. I'll recognize you and you stand up. Yes, Plowman.
Hello, members of the steering committee. My name is Plamen Dimitrov, and my wife and I operate a vacation rental in Cook County. I wanted to speak in front of you because I hear a lot of comments in the community that the vacation rentals are operated by people who are not in a county, they're not in the community. And that's not the case for my wife and I. We live here in the community. We work here. We raised 2 kids, 16 and 14, and participate in after work and after school activities in the community. So I wanted to make sure that members of the community and the community are aware that there are a lot of people like my wife and I who are here, who operate the vacation rental and keep a close eye on what's going on. And also wanted to say a little bit about how the vacation rental has affected our lives. For many years, my wife and I worked hard, but we always were paycheck to paycheck, and it was very hard to have some financial cushion and to feel comfortable with if something unexpected happened to us. You know, we have kids and medical bills. If something happened, it was always like, oh, where is the money going to come from? And the vacation rental, although it hasn't been a tremendous source of income, and if somebody's interested, I can provide financial statements so people can see how much we live. It has given us this financial independence and a little bit of a cushion that we know that if something happened today or tomorrow, we will make it, you know, we will weather the storm and we will move forward. And we finally have achieved that a little bit of a financial independence that wasn't possible before, even though we both get jobs and still have full-time jobs and work full-time. And also, this will be my last comment. I don't want to take too much of the time, but I hear a lot about the fact that the vacation rentals are taken from the housing inventory, and yeah, to some extent that may be true, but I gotta tell you that when I looked for a house about 15 years ago now, vacation rentals weren't a thing at the time, and there were hardly any homes on the market to rent or to buy. And the ones that there were way out of reach for people that are working in the community and get a wage that's comparable for this part of the state. Yes, there were a lot of $400,000 and $500,000 homes, but we didn't make that kind of money. We couldn't afford it. So luckily, the economic downturn, lucky for us, the economic downturn during the President Obama happened. Housing values plummeted, and we were able to purchase that home in Woodson. We lived there for about 10 years and we moved on to our new home now. So when you make decisions and help the commissioners make decisions on the vacation rentals, I urge you to take into consideration people like my wife and I. For us, it's made it possible to remain in the community and to raise our kids here. And it will be very hard for many families like mine to remain here if it wasn't for a supplemental income that we receive from these people. If somebody would like to contact me at any time, I'm available to discuss and provide my input, and I want to take the time and the opportunity to speak about it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you.
Can we ask the speaker a question? We ask questions of them.
You could ask, yes,
I'm
we have,
just curious, have you gone through the vacation rental licensing process?
We've gone through
Any
Every
comment
requirement.
on that? That's kind of.
I am all for having rules and regulations. I think everybody will win from having a streamlined process in where we know how many vacation rentals are in the community. We know the size of them. I'm all in favor of having a process. I don't see it as burdensome in any way. It was pretty easy to apply, pay the fee, upload. It's kind of in a way automated. I find it easy to complete, and so yeah, I have gone through the process and through the Minnesota Department of Health too. So I think it's what we have right now. It's working for the vacation side of things. In my opinion, I don't want to speak on behalf of all the vacation rental owners, but yeah.
thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to Tim Nelson then to have a brief discussion on the process and how we're going to move forward.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I do apologize for all the technical issues. We're still ironing this out and can't wait till next week's meeting of the Board of Commissioners. That's going to be equally as interesting, I'm quite sure. Yeah, so what I would like to do is point out that we did get some comments in your packets, and I emailed those out to you. We did get some comments in from the SWCD, but now in the last 4 or 5 days, we did get some comments in both from CVR and from Scott. How do you pronounce that last name again, Scott? I'm sorry. Melhoff. Okay, I want to make sure I'm doing that right. And I didn't know if you guys wanted to walk through any of your comments for the committee. That's going to end up in all of the committee notes that we have, but they're all included in the packets now. So I guess that would just be up to you guys if you want to. There's nobody here from the SWCD to walk through those notes. So it would just be up to, and I've got CVRs first and then Scott's if you wanted to comment at a.
Yeah, ours are just the questions that we were asked to submit. Straightforward.
Okay.
You guys have questions for us? I guess what you put in here is pretty self-explanatory.
Okay.
really. It's just the comment of whether purchasing some information. would be beneficial.
Sure.
Data, that's all.
Okay, well, good. Then we'll move along. And in that packet, you'll see I did also include the survey that was done. But first I will touch on, we have a discussion on process and I had some questions at the end of last meeting with regards to, how we're going to approach this, how we're going to do the discussion, obviously, with a committee this large. It can be like herding cats. I don't imagine we're all going in necessarily the same direction as this. So we just can cover a few of the basic ground rules. When we set this up and looking at the quorum, the commissioners had set up for all of the members to be actual members, full voting members and such like that. So a quorum to be able to make a decision is the majority of the members. So if we're looking at doing a with regards to, you look at that line on number 4 at the end, it says consensus levels. There are kind of visioning processes. I know there's ways to facilitate discussions that have consensus levels that aren't necessarily simple majority votes. And they like to describe it in terms of a simple majority vote can be kind of competing discussions and competing ideas, whereas having a consensus of majority -3 or majority -2, whatever you would want to set as a consensus level, is a more cooperative method in terms of obtaining a consensus on that, because you're trying to bridge the differences in achieving that level of consensus. I don't know with the number of the amount of time, limited time that we have, if we're able to actually go through some of those, kind of larger consensus building operations. I mean, the easiest and the quickest is to go through and do a simple majority vote on each of those things. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but I kind of wanted to throw it out there with regards to the committee in terms of how you felt that would go. Because if we do simple majority, we would get through the voting much quicker, but with the consensus building, then you can come out with, a more cooperative end result, but it's going to take longer to do that, understanding the few meetings that we have available within our timeline. So I just want to throw it out there for any comments or questions.
Yes, I do have comment where I'm coming from. If you're thinking of, and what you decide the process should be, is probably not for me to say, but I feel like I should relate my experience with voting is you have winners and losers. You can have a very close vote and a lot of unhappy loser, people in the minority. The consensus to me is when there is discussion, there will be pros and cons, but a consensus, you get to a point where the consensus is declared, and that means that everyone is able to live with the decision. That you will support the decision, even though you may not like all aspects, and you will not sabotage the decision. So that's my feeling. The consensus is different than voting. Consensus is, we generally agree. We don't like everything. It's not perfect, but I can live it. That's kind of my thought. Does that make sense to other people, or am I in the minority? I'd like to hear other people, because one important thing is that people are able to express their views in a low-risk environment. And if we're discussing either in small groups or the total group, I think it's pretty important. Everybody has a perspective. And they have an opportunity to express that, discuss it, or pass.
Sure, Jason?
Yeah, just quickly, kind of dovetailing off what you're saying, I think that maybe because of the limited time we have, I think the approach could be, we try to reach consensus by talking largely about the subject, whatever the thing is. If we can't, we bring it to a vote. Like our first objective should be let's try to agree on a compromise or middle path, and if that doesn't work, majority rules. Otherwise, we could be doing that for a long time.
Yeah, the complexity of this issue, I would support what you're saying. The complexity of what we have here, to do something within the next few weeks is really gonna be tough for me. Just to read the through.
I think based on the survey results, if we were to establish like 4 or 5 primary points that we were going to come to consensus on, or if it was really specific as to the questions that we're trying to answer or the decisions we're trying to make, the consensus might be an opportunity. But just on a broader, just conversational, just overall, I don't think we'll ever come to consensus. But if we were able to nail down, you know, maybe points that we can discuss, I think it would be possible. I've worked with boards that I'm on in this community, we all are consensus groups. We rarely make decisions that just.
Yeah, no, it's coming from the the avenue that we come from. We don't see a lot of boards that it's easily to reach consensus. I mean, we especially in our county, there's a lot of independent thought. There's a lot of ideas being expressed, and a lot of boards are out there are individuals that. Okay. That my goodness.
Yeah.
Can you see anything, Hillary?
No, I see your name with it saying Cook County, Minnesota. Maybe it's making some kind of statement between question and consensus.
There we go. Perhaps. So it is difficult, and what I kind of am wanting to do is, we've always dealt with the contentious issues in smaller, really focused groups on this. This is the largest group we've had to contend with this. Outside of when I first got here, there was an initiative to update the entire zoning ordinance in one fell swoop. And after 6 years of consultants and such, we bagged that and decided to chip away a little bit at a time, just because we could not reach consensus on a number of things. So what I'm kind of would like to do is, this one we're coming into to look at establishing some goals and discussing some of the issues and the impacts on housing and such. But coming into the next meetings, I feel I want to kind of almost do the similar thing like we did to this. I sent the survey out, and I want to just get the topics in kind of their order in which we want to discuss those, and then send out how, maybe a survey on each of those topics, and we'll just kind of hit that at each of the meetings. Does that make sense, or no, or?
Just in terms of time, your reason mentioned is certainly livable to me.
Okay.
If we can kind of assume a consensus unless you hear strong opposition, and if somebody wants to call a question, that makes sense to me.
And I was going to say, Tim, hi, this is Hillary out here in space. I was going to say, having a vote it isn't an either or. There's always a conversation. And in that conversation, the vote is in some ways a consensus reached from after the conversation. So I think we could sit here and talk about things for a very long time and not reach any consensus. I've been in committees where that's happened. And so I think if we use a survey, have opportunity for input, and then do some kind of vote, you end up with the same process in some ways, if you have opportunities for conversation about an issue.
Sure, and just one last comment on that one, then I would like to just kind of touch on the comment of a non-threat. Now, I would hope that whatever discussion pattern we take in here is just non-threatening to everybody. I mean, I think everybody, like, we're all independent minded, that anybody can put out what their concerns and thoughts are. And I think we can do so. And I think it's been illustrated over the course of the last meeting. We even had that interview where on WTIP where he said it was kind of boring. We all got along and we all just kind of sat and talked, and there wasn't a lot of contention going on. And I think that that's probably what's going to happen over the course of this. So, and the other comment I put on there is the length of discussions, and what I was intending to kind of hit on is per each item. There's a lot of times the commissioners always, Board of Commissioners always reserve the right to limit comment on any one thing for 3 to 5 minutes or whatever, depending on how much conversation goes on. So we want to make sure everybody does get the opportunity to be able to say what it is that they want to say without feeling some sort of time crunch. So far, we haven't had that issue. People have been able to express everything that they wanted to express, and we haven't had to limit any kind of timeframes. And I'm just kind of hoping that that'll be the case too. Some of the points will go fairly quickly, like, do we want to continue regulating them? That was kind of an easy call. So we'll get some of those, and we'll get a little bit more sticky ones. So then we'll just, unless anybody has any other questions or comments with regards to that line, we can get into the goals. And I kind of thought,
Before we go past that, I was just gonna bring up the vote of a government or a county employee. There's certain things that I don't feel like I should be necessarily voting on, like if we're trying to put a restriction or something on a vacation rental. I'm more or less here to provide information and that aspect of it, where I think some of the other members' vote is more important.
you know, that's a really good point. And I would say that with the committee established the way that it was, the commissioners kind of designated or appointed everybody as full membership. And I think everybody can take the opportunity to maybe abstain. If you're talking lodging taxes, or you're talking whatever, sure, pull back. But if it's something that doesn't impact you, I know Molly, the county attorney, would have kind of that same impact. But when we started these, and most of the committees we do, they're internal committees that we want people to come in and be able to voice them. So they've always started out as internal level governmental county government committees, with the input and the feedback and the assistance from the community. This just happens to be a larger one. If we were to pull all of the government, people out of this one, yeah, it would be, then
7 without.
7, which is a normal, a good normal sized committee.
Well, it'd be 12 voting, 7 removed.
Oh, okay. So, and I guess I would leave it up to the chair if you wanted to have it so that all governmental entities were then not able to vote. Because we do have alternates in place for the positions that, if somebody does not show up, there is an alternate in that place. So would it be up to the desire of the chair to then have all government level employees abstain?
James?
Madam Chair, this isn't advisory.
True enough.
And so voting here is not binding. They're not actually deciding, they're making recommendations. And so I wouldn't worry too much about that. I mean, I appreciate the discomfort, Bob, but I also think, this is an advisory committee, and I feel like by virtue of having been appointed to this body, we all have a responsibility to participate and to make our opinions known. So, it's not like this will determine how things move forward. It's recommendations.
Are the county employees all, most of them, part of the steering committee?
Yes.
I have no problem myself. You all have more information on a practical county functioning level. I have no problem with that. If you're asking for my opinion, I'll give it easily. No cost.
Well, how about consensus? Let's see if we can have
I don't
consensus.
any problem with everybody listed on there having some voting if it comes to a vote.
Okay.
There's knowledge, and different perspectives.
Sure.
But when it comes to words, like consensus, like balance is a key word in
Yeah.
there. And what the steering committee has charged us with, some of those key words need to be defined, so we know what we're voting.
So that's a good point too, Al, is that anytime we're going through this process, if there's any element, any definition, any word, any concept that needs to be further refined, certainly encourage anybody and everybody to vocalize that and get that out in so it can be hashed through. So we're all talking about the same thing. Yeah, because we are coming from different places. I'm coming from the regulatory side as is Joseph, but others are coming from, you know, the management side and everything else. So there are different things and we speak a little bit of a different language sometimes. So that's a good point. Yeah, yeah. So is there anybody that has a concern or issue with us, the government employees maintaining on the list as it was established by the board? And hearing or seeing none, then, and Bob, again, I guess that would be with the understanding that if there's an issue that you don't feel comfortable voting on, you would abstain at that point.
You can always have the option of abstaining.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so the establishment of basic goals, and that rose to the top. If you look at that survey that it sent out, there were 3 that had risen to the top right away. And that was the establishment of goals, and that was tied with the impacts on housing. And then lastly, the third was overall numbers of places that would be defined either within the county or within particular zones and such like that. And so we'll kind of go on, but we start with the goals, and it's always good to kind of lay that line out there. We have, and I included in the email that I'd sent out to you what the purpose and intent of the ordinance was. We had a very basic intent at that time. We just wanted to get the numbers on. We wanted to get a licensing program established and in place so that we could go ahead and massage that as we get further down the road, and we're further down the road now. So the goals have kind of blossomed a little bit. They've changed a little bit in terms of there's more of a focus on housing and such. So I want to do this in kind of like 2 parts. And I figured we could start by having overall goals for the ordinance, overall goals for the licensing program. What it is it that we want to accomplish as an overall goal? And then when we get to each of the subsections, like the environmental impacts with septic, well, water, all those things, then we can hit and discuss on particular goals for that category. Does that sound about right or okay? So this will be then, I guess, a kind of a very open part, not very dictated. And I gotta, again, apologize because I was at the Oshkosh Air Show last week up and through today. So it would be nice to start with a good chart and do all the whiteboard stuff like that, but I was a little distracted. So we're hoping for a good, free and open discussion with regards to the setting of goals. Remember, we've got this being recorded, so it's going to be all locked in. I had put an example on there on that sheet in terms of, you know, okay, a basic goal, licensing 100% of all defined vacation rental operations prior to and during the entire time of the operation is in place. And that's kind of basic. It seems like a basic goal. We would want that. And the problem is, as I had described before, is not kind of wanting that goal, but in the application of it by virtue of playing whack-a-mole. Some people will advertise, and if our web-based company finds the advertisement, we get a letter sent out to them, then the advertisement goes away, and they say, no, I never did advertise that. We're not renting out. And so then they disappear and then maybe pop up on another website somewhere. So it's the numbers are always kind of changing, not a lot, but they are changing a little bit. But that's at least a kind of stated goal. And that's kind of the example that I was taking a look at. So anybody have anything else, or do we like that one, or do you want to offer up some other goals for the program?
I think this is a good one. I might add one additional thing to it. Just based on some concerns that impresses me, and that is that if properties are not burned in their lot,
And that's one, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that would kind of come under that when we're talking about, I think we're going to have a more in-depth kind of a discussion on the lodging tax, tax classification and such like that. That'll be under that, but absolutely, that'd be one of them.
I've had a question in terms of the actual licensing. Is that done every year?
Yes,
Okay.
it's an annual license.
About $250?
It's $200.
200, okay.
And I will say, just so that everybody is understands, we intentionally picked a licensing program over that. Some counties do it differently. Lake County does an interim use permit. Some do conditional use permits and such. And some counties work with the Minnesota Department of Health, and they have their whole food, beverage, and lodging program. So we chose the licensing program because of a few different reasons, and we did it intentionally. One, it is something that we can modify year to year. If somebody gets an interim use permit, then it's locked in. They got that use. An interim use has to be set for a certain period of time. It can be 1 year, 3 years. It can be the length of time that the person owns the property, but a drop dead date has to be established. In order for it to be renewed, it calls for a public hearing. So licenses don't call for a public hearing. You just meet the criteria and you get issued the license. If you do an interim or a conditional use permit, then public hearings would be required for every operation. And if you look at 260 plus operations, logistically, our planning commission, when we do about 24 in a year, is not set up to be able to handle that quantity. So that's intentionally why we wanted to do it more, so it gives us the flexibility to modify the requirements year after year. And we don't have to wait for any understanding that the interim use or other permits would stagger and such. John, and then you, Anton.
I'm wondering, is the 250 or 200 a year, is that covering the cost, the county's costs for licensing, these licenses?
It does in its current configuration. And one of the concerns about the current configuration is that of enforcement and keeping up with everything. If you saw in the very beginning, when I went through that elongated presentation of the program, I did the organizational chart for the department, and both enforcement and vacation rentals are one fragment of one position. And so it's not allotted enough time, I don't think, to be able to do all of the enforcement it needs to do. So in theory, yes, it pays for it, but it's not paying for enough to really throw everything at it. Yes. Yeah, not intentionally holding back, but not necessarily finding everything. It's pretty intensive going through the numbers that we get from host compliance, and we run them with Bob, and it's kind of a never ending kind of mix of spreadsheets and such. And we sat down, Joseph, Bob, and I sat down last week and said, oh, well, here's some other operations that host compliance has, and did they feed them to us? And so it just takes that logistical time.
So maybe a goal is to review the fees.
The fees will be one of the issues, yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and in fact, again, so we did the license because it's not very invasive, doesn't take a public hearing, it's logistically easy to manage. And we set the fee at $200 because we calculated out what it would take for the cost of the web-based service, along with the staff member, the portion of the staff member, and it covers it. It's the only program in the department that actually pays for itself, enforcement notwithstanding. So we set the permit level or the license fee at that level because it paid for itself in theory, and then also at a low level to encourage more people going ahead. $200 when you're renting out, over the course of a year is quite affordable. So we've been told by other counties and by the host compliance web-based service themselves that we're on a pretty low end in terms of our fee. So yes, that will be one of those issues coming up. Anton?
I just wondered, does that cover like as a parcel ID, or is it attached, like if you have multiple rentals on a property, is each one then assess the?
Yes, the latter. Each, we allow for residential parcels, we allow 2 operations per parcel. Each operation has to have its own license and pay its own license fee.
I-
Jason?
I have a comment too.
Okay, go ahead, Hillary, and then we're going to Jason.
I think that the language license 100%, I would take out 100% because you don't know some of the operations that you don't know. For example, last week we just turned in one that was operating up here without a license that Joseph said had no license. So I would just use the language license, all defined vacation rental operations. So I would take out the percentage because you really don't know when you're at 100%. So I would that's the only thing I would do, because like you said, it's kind of a mishmash and you don't know what you don't know unless someone brings it to your attention. So if you say just license all of them without the percent, it just says we're going to license all of them and allows people to bring that forth.
That is a good point, Hillary. And I wrote it pretty quick as an example, and I intended for the little phrase after that, all defined vacation rental operations, to include the ones that we just know about. And it doesn't include the ones that we don't know about until we know about them. Then we want those licensed. So yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying, 100%. And that's the thing about goals, is that, you want to try to make them achievable. So.
Yeah, I think if you just say license all defined vacation rental operations.
And if you say define.
I mean, that's really what you want to do, is you want to ensure that those that are operating as a vacation rental are licensed. And then the other thing I could ask is that when other people speak, I can't hear them as well. So if you could just reframe the questions, or the response, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Jason?
Yeah, just a quick question about framing what we're trying to achieve in this section here. We're trying to look at goals, right? So we did the survey, we identified the people's top concerns. Talking about goals of this committee that we're going to reach by the end of this period, or are we talking about specific targets for the regulation process? Like we're getting into some of the weeds about licensing, but are we talking, like, for example, is the goal make sure that all known, like we're just talking about, all known vacation rentals are permitted? Like that's a goal. Is the goal try to preserve single family housing stock for residents? Like, are those the kind of goals you're talking about, Tim? Or are we talking about, like, let's increase and review fees and licensing process? Like, what level of goals are we trying to establish?
Yeah, so, and that's a really good point, Jason. And no doubt with a group this large, the discussion is probably going to ebb and flow into each of those categories. It was my intent to kind of hit the goals as they would pertain to the ordinance and the whole program from a high level view. We're going to, as I try to hit on each of the narrowly defined goals, like about the lodging taxes, being that when we're hitting that specific segment of the discussion. So it's not just for this this group, but it's for the overall ordinance going into the future. What's the goal of our program, licensing program, going into the future?
It's a very good question. And maybe just to complete Hillary's thought, license, I don't know what defined means. We're gonna have to define. Otherwise, you could just say license all vacation rental operations. That's a goal. To license all. Then we're talking about objectives. An objective might be high standards, enforcement of violations, blah, blah, blah. But I would see one of the recommendations probably has already come out of this committee. Wouldn't it be separate topic now to reauthorize ordinance 62 for another maybe 3 years, sunset it again in a similar way that it was originally? I don't know, but that's just an idea. We have to have the commissioners reauthorize that ordinance because it's sunset. So
Yes, we do.
that's one recommendation we would have to the steering committee to go back and have a commissioner do that. Otherwise, you're dead.
But first it has to go through the planning commission.
Well,
Then,
whatever
so
the, whatever the
we're
county
advisory,
process
they're
is.
advisory. We have two advisories going to the county commission.
Right, and I will bring up, why did we have in 2015 an elaborate, well-defined, idealistic, comprehensive plan, and then we came to an ordinance? Because there's so many great words in that comprehensive plan, such as protect, preserve, and enhance. Those are also good. And there's a lot of great verbiage there. Done by a consultant firm, I'm sure, which was paid for.
Yeah, there's a few points in there to kind of go, and you're absolutely right. And I kind of mentioned at the last meeting that the comp plan, in order for us to achieve that level of consensus for the board and the community to accept that comp plan, is a little, it's not real pointed. It is kind of thoughts and ideas. It's not really narrowed down. And we run into that, John's mentioned the planning commission has to, once the commissioner gets a recommendation from this board, they send it to the planning commission to do hold a public hearing, and then we get out all the comments. That's been a frustration of the planning commission with regards to requests or ordinance changes, of that there's not a lot of real specificity in that comp plan. So it's good, and it's probably the best that we were able to achieve. I was here during 2 iterations of that. But the comp plan does set the stage. The key words with regards to ordinances by Minnesota statute 394 and 375 are health, safety, and welfare. Those are the kind of big ones that any county needs for the establishment of.
What is the connection with us and the planning commission then? I thought we were going back to make recommendations to commissioner.
Okay, good.
Well, give me clarity.
Okay, really, really good point. The way this process works, this is an advisory committee, right? And so we're going to end up here with a set of recommendations that we're going to forward on to the Board of Commissioners. Once the Board of Commissioners takes it, they'll say, okay, well, this looks pretty good. We got to get it to the Planning Commission for them to be able to hold the public hearing before anything's adopted. So from here, it goes to the Board of Commissioners, to the Planning Commission, back to the Board of Commissioners. And that's presuming, changes may be made along every one of those steps.
After hearing.
Well, the Board of Commissioners can make changes to it. Like I said, this is just an advisory committee. So once it goes to the Board of Commissioners, they can look at it and say, yeah, I'm pretty much like this. Obviously, there's more strength in accepting the recommendation of the committee because of the diversity of the committee and the opinions in here. But they have the ability to send whatever they would like to send to the Planning Commission for them to review again. And when it does go and reinstitutes the ordinance, looking at it just from a logistical side, I'm not hugely in favor of a sunset, or like it completely goes away again, because we can always amend an ordinance. We do our modern zoning ordinance right now was made in 1984, and I think there's several dozens of changes that were made to that over the course of time, where it's just tweaking and not wholesale changes. So we have that always continued capability to change an ordinance.
So can we get back? Yeah, I just want to just get back so we can move on and have our overall goal, okay? Because a lot about process. And now I think it's, time to talk a little bit about our goal here, which I like the idea of it, keeping it very short and sweet. And then underneath that, you can start dealing with some of the subsets of just licensed vacational rental, operational vacation rentals. I mean, it's a very simple thing. It's a continuation of the current ordinance. And what you're really doing is updating it, but you're ensuring that there is a licensing process for vacation rentals, period. Not during the entire, you don't need all that language prior to and during. And that's just a redundancy of language. I think you can do pretty simple on that.
One more goal recommendation, Tim.
Yes, sir.
Just that we determine if a cap is necessary on number of permits, and if so, what that number is.
Yeah, that was, that's a discussion I think is, let me see, limiting, that's on number 7, limit numbers of vacation rentals. On the agenda.
Oh, I'm jumping ahead, sorry.
Yeah, a little bit. But and I do think that's we're definitely warranted a discussion on that. Now, there are two, but there are different avenues that people think about when they're looking at, and we'll get into this. This is the only thing I'm going to say to this, and then we'll move on. With regards to limiting the numbers. Okay, so people talk about a moratorium. One of the suggestions on that survey that I did within the group was to perhaps issue no more new licenses until we get everything set into place. And that's a moratorium. In order to do that, we would have to adopt an interim ordinance and go through that process to do that, which we have done one time when I've been here. We almost did it with regards to sled dogs. We did do it with regards to towers. And boards, for some reason, are really reluctant to do that. And I actually, at this point in time, I don't have any problem with moratorium or not licensing any new ones. But like I said, it takes an ordinance adoption process. And we're at the time of the year right now that there aren't really going to be many more new operations setting up. So our requirement to get licenses renewed and to get them into place is at the first part of the year. And so when we're looking at July going into August, I would think, looking at the amount of energy and focus it would take to put a moratorium in to how much we would affect in terms of new operations starting up or not, I think is pretty minimal. So we can start that way. Mr. Roof.
Yeah, I'm the guy that has to enforce this. And I'm just saying from my perspective, if you put a moratorium or limitations on the numbers, you have to have an effective enforcement mechanism. And it's very difficult because it's back to Tim's whack-a-mole. As it is now, people know that if they're licensed, if they're having a vacation rental, they need to get a license. And I'm getting in probably 3 or 4 a week still on a regular basis. So we're up to 267 that we have licensed for this year. But it concerns me to figure out how we're going to enforce this. Right now, we have post compliance through their parent company, Granicus, who we have a contract with, who have web bots out there, and they look for properties in Cook County that are advertising as vacation rentals. And there's a way that we can go on there. We have something called a dashboard, which is kind of a lot of different ways of looking at their data that they're producing. We can go in there and I can print out a list, which I did over the weekend, and looked at the properties that they say don't have licenses, who are identified properties and are in Cook County and are doing advertising, so they're considered vacation rentals. And I printed out their full list, and then I went through there and I pulled out what was resorts or had other reasons that they weren't needing to be licensed. And I ended up with 41 properties that are currently, in my opinion, non-compliant with this current ordinance. And now the next thing is, I know these properties are out there. I have to figure out how we're going to get information to them in the form of a letter saying that they need to be licensed. So, and that's just a small part of my work during the summer. So we have to have an effective way, whatever we do, whether we keep the program the same we have it now, we have to be able to enforce that effectively. If we set up limitations or moratoriums, then it rises the level of complexity of the enforcement.
Sorry, Jessica, can I just clarify the 3 or 4 that you're getting a week? of those, are those majority new or are they renewing? their
Those are new.
license? Those are new,
We're not getting any renewals in now.
because they're all at the end of the year.
Well, the renewal program is set up, it begins in December, like for next year, it was December 1st of this year to January 31st of next year. That's what we did last year, and we found out we were still not getting everything in, so we extended that for a 2-month period. And we ended up pretty much getting a good response. But again, it's communication. We have to send emails, we have to send letters, so people are aware of this. That's our responsibility. So, you know, most of the stuff's coming in now is new people want a property, want to make a vacation rental, or they learned that there is a program to license these. So.
It's just a very big number. It surprised me.
Well, I would like to just kind of bring us back again. I'm channeling Hillary. I think she was probably on the verge of taskmastering us back, because what we're discussing here is actually a point number 7 on the agenda. We are going to be talking about that a little bit more. So kind of save those thoughts. It's probably good if we wrap up this whole basic goal. So we've got the one in terms of setting it for the program. And is there anything else that we want to address for the whole program like that?
Sure. I, from the Board of Adjustment, when we get to, or for enforcement purposes, I think having behind in there, in the goals right from the beginning, this group deals with those definitions so that the enforcement can be very clear. On that goal, I agree with that goal. I think that goal is limited for the discussion of this committee, and maybe this will need some wordsmithing, an additional goal here. Minimize adverse impacts of the RBO and operation, property owners' rights or ability. That gives us, I think, more opening to have these discussions. Because if we're just looking at our goal is to license everything.
Hillary?
Well, within that goal, then you can list all your other kinds of issues. So if your goal is to, maintain and have a licensing process, then you can talk about the environmental concerns. So you can say, if you're operating a vacation rental by owner, some of the other concerns that we put on that. And so I think it addresses that by listing it under so your goal is your overarching theme of what it is you want to accomplish. And then you can be specific in your objectives, and then within your objectives, you get even more specific within your strategies. So I think your goal has to be broad-based so that then you can stick in the different objectives, and then you can stick in the different strategies.
Suggestion, just observing the ordinance, which will be up for reauthorization or whatever you call it, has articles. One of them is enforcement. And I guess I would suggest that that's going to be one of some point in our process, serious discussion. Because, Director of Land Services is the one that gets after the non-compliant. Now, of course, far majority of people are going to be nice Americans following the rules. It's the ones that don't are going to cause the major problem. And I think we need to have recourses for that. And I didn't catch the whole gist of what that gentleman mentioned. But if we were to have some kind of a citizen's review, it might help enforcement. But again, we're getting to that other issue. The overarching goal is to license all vacation rental operations. So I don't think we have any problem with that, do we? That sounds like a goal.
Yeah, and this
Now,
is something
under
that
that is going to be probably by the articles of the ordinance that we might recommend. amendments.
Right, and it's, as I kind of mentioned, that we'll be spending most of our time when we're discussing real specificity with regards to what we would like to say changed or not changed is in Articles 4 and 5 of the ordinance. Enforcement definitely is one of those. And we don't need a bunch of goals for the overall program. So there's kind of two listed. We want all operations licensed, and we wanted Charlie to be able to have them not create adverse impacts to the neighbors, but maintaining the property owner's balance to be able to have a vacation rental. Is that kind of very short? Yeah. Okay, do we need more than that?
I would think that within the definitions or within the requirements of a vacation rental licensure, that it should be required just in the difficulty of tracking these and seeking these out, that the definition of the host's name is as defined on the license matches what they advertise as the host, matches what they report on lodging tax. Like, it's a simple definition. Whoever is applying for the license should be required to advertise the same name as the host, should be the same person that's remitting lodging tax, should be the same person that's responsible for the 24-hour contract. It should be, it's a simple definition, but it puts the onus on the license holder to be responsible for those things, and verification and double checking of licensure shouldn't be that difficult. You know, I don't tell Caribou Highlands advertises on Airbnb and VRBO. You have to be a super sleuth to delineate that it's Caribou Highlands advertising those units, not a property owner. It shouldn't be that way. We should say hosted by Caribou Highlands, hosted by, etc. I think that's a simple requirement that would cause a lot less sleuthing.
I just,
We'll get Joseph and then we'll get you, Hillary.
okay.
I don't know how far we're jumping ahead of things here, and I don't want to get too crazy, but to your point, some jurisdictions require people who have vacation rental licenses and are need to be able to function in their jurisdiction to actually list their vacation license number on their advertising. It's a very quick way, easy way to see, oh, yep, and we can check that number. We don't have to worry about what name are they using or whatever. That number identifies all the information we have on that property.
And just to jump in real quick, I kind of held back. I caught that comment in the first meeting, and I kind of plugged that into when we're looking at license requirements, because I want to go back and be able to talk with host compliance. There's logistical issues with us and how they format their forms, how they format everything, that we try to all go in and try to modify things. And I just want to make sure that what we're doing, I have no problem in terms of what you're saying there, to be able to kind of logistically do that, make that happen, which is good timing, because at the same time that we're looking at this licensing program in its entirety, we're also looking at our agreement with host compliance, and that needs to be updated like by the end of October. So what we're looking at is affecting those things. It's as simple as just what the fields are and everything like that. So I think that's a good comment, and I think that, you know, we'll get there. I think we'll discuss that more and have more information from host compliance when we get to that, the license application requirements.
That's all I'm saying. Is that we're moving in. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Hillary.
Well, all I'm saying is that we keep moving into specifics of enforcement when what we're trying to do is just get an agreement on a goal. And so I think if we can get the goal, and then from there, I mean, I feel like kind of redundancy back here, but I keep feeling like we're moving off. How are we going to enforce this? What are we going to do? Blah, blah, blah. We have to agree for what is our goal, and then we can add the parts to it. So I'm a broken record out here in space.
In common vernacular, you have goals, but objectives to meet the goal. Again, I suggest we go back to the articles, and some of them, we may want to suggest modification. I mean, do a license fee, license requirements, whatever. You know,
Yeah.
she's got a good point.
Well, for sure, and that is, it's difficult, thank you, Hillary, because you kind of make me cognizant when I start hearing us kind of going down a hole, and that is one of my concerns about having such a large committee, is you have a tendency to go down the rabbit hole, so to speak. They're all really good points, but we should focus on those things where our end, those other ones will be on the agendas and such like that. Like you're saying, Al, with regards to the objectives and such, and looking in the ordinance ones, those will come up under the specific topical issues, like when we hit environment. So then we have goals and objectives and such like that for each one of those, like with the septic ones and such. So right now, I think we just hit on that, and we've got two that I've kind of heard gleaned out of this discussion at this point, Jason and then John.
I just have one goal that would maybe addresses a lot of, clearly, these are all so closely connected that it's hard to divorce them from each other. Like the impacts on housing is also connected to caps, because if there's not an impact on housing, you don't need a cap, right? So it's really hard to separate them, but maybe one programmatic goal, if we're looking at the ordinance, we're looking at regulatory environment, is to say, we want to make sure that the program is self-sufficient or self-funding for whatever it needs. So instead of coming from it at like, well, we can't enforce it because we don't have the resources, we shouldn't address that yet. We should say like, what do we need to do? And then figure out what we need to do to back into that with resources. We could increase permitting fees. We could do a bunch of tools and mechanisms to fund what we need for enforcement. But the goal should be the program is self-funding enough to do everything it needs to do.
This is what I believe also. There should be a self-funding of whatever the ordinance calls for. And I question whether it is now.
Well, it is, but they're not able to do the full, like Joseph is saying, they can't do everything they would like to because of lack of resources. Well, that's just a question of, okay, we'll get to that line item and look at what the resources are, and we need to change the structure. But we shouldn't limit what we should be doing in a goal-oriented, like ideal world. We shouldn't limit it by our current restrictions. We should back into that.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and that's one of the reasons why too, looking at the funding mechanism, and I don't want to go too far down that one either. Why we chose the license, because if you do it as a interim use or conditional use, that's one fee, and that's it until that permit expires or whatever. The license is an annual license. It's easier to budget that out and to see what the impacts are, to be able to make those modifications during the course of the year in preparation for the next year. We didn't really know how to anticipate the impacts that we were going to be felt on staff with regards to the level of enforcement we're able to do, because we didn't have a program yet. So I think we're doing pretty good for starting off with no program. So yeah. So, okay, do you,
Is that a goal?
Is that a third?
Does that make sense?
it makes perfect sense.
As a program is concerned, like, we want to make sure that it's able to sustain itself and whatever it needs. So we're redefining what it needs in this committee, right? But we want to make sure it's part of that we're not going to be hitting a deficit. It's not my department, but I'm assuming you don't want to just, eat into your own budget. So adjust, like, do whatever we need to make sure the program is actually checking all the boxes and funding itself. That's a goal I would recommend.
Well, absolutely, as a department head who sits in front of the commissioners and have to kind of defend the budget, having a goal where a program is self-funded in its entirety is a good one to achieve. Fully behind that. I wouldn't excuse myself from a vote for that one. Okay, so there's three that I'm seeing right now. Does anybody want to throw anything else into the generalized hopper? John, did you?
Yeah, I had just kind of a question maybe for Jenny is, what's the goal? What was the goal of the county commission is only created this committee, right? And what's the goal that the county commission is giving us? Is there a target there? And then additionally, we're looking at one of the goals as getting full compliance, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that the original goal? And are we looking to add on to that goal or continue on just with what had been originally created?
I can let Jenny go ahead and respond to the commissioner one. The second one I can hit real quick is that, yeah, it's always the goal to enforce or have her No, you better go ahead. I forgot what the second part was. They told me this would happen.
The ordinance, when it first came out in 2017, 18, somewhere in there, was approved by the board at that time as our goal for having some type of guidelines for the RVOs. We had limited input because we really did not know the cost of it other than, hiring a company to take care of it. We just, we felt at that time that we had to have a beginning, and that was the beginning. And reviewing it, we felt was important to do, whether we did that, in increments of 3 years, and that's why we're here. to review it.
And I would just dovetail in to say that that report that we presented at the last week, you guys have a copy of that from the steering committee, the recommendations to the board of commissioners, which the board of commissioners adopted when establishing this committee, did set forth what the objectives or the goals were for this particular committee. So we can go back and reference what those goals are. And it is basically, to just kind of go back, take that step back, get the high level view of the program, see if we're meeting our intended goals. Like I said, at that time, the main focus was more in terms of the adverse or potential adverse impacts on neighboring properties, and not as much with the impacts on housing. There was some of that, but more now, there seems to be a lot more discussion with the housing impacts or potential impacts on housing. And still, there's always still the concern about neighboring impacts, but it seems like that impacts on housing, at least in the discussion part about it, has risen to a higher level than that of the adverse impacts.
So what are the three goals that you have jotted down other than the one? Because I have to admit, I was confused about how this was laid out, just as goal number one being the only goal listed, as we kind of were very focused on the language of that goal,
Yeah.
but not creating the list of other goals that were, so I wasn't keeping track of the other goals that we've established.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And that list that you have there is just kind of an example. For example, let's talk about this as a goal. So I had heard about the licensing all, and I'm not jotting stuff down because I actually go back and re-watch the recording to take the minutes and do all the real specific stuff. As you can see, it's hard enough for me to make sure the volume's working and keep the meeting going. But so the one was getting the licensing, all the operations licensed. The second one was one Charlie had with regard to minimize the impacts again, but still having the balance for property owners to be able to exercise their ability to have a vacation rental. And then the third being self-funded operation or program. Just to, obviously they need to be wordsmithed, and that would get to the committee we talk about. And then for further lists, because like I said, we don't have to generate all of them right now. I had intended only for there to be a few. And then as we discuss each subsection, each other kind of identified concern or issue, we would then look at, like I had the example, the two goals for the environmental dealing with septic and well water protection, surface water protection. And then we would establish goals specific to that. So this one is just kind of that generalized portion where we're looking at setting goals for the overall program. And then the next thing, as we discuss each of the areas, we would look at setting more specific goals with specific objectives and strategies. Does that help?
Yes, yeah.
It really helps, but what we almost need is a visual, somebody that's skilled at writing out, because I'm losing track of it too. And we've got 3 goals on the table. It would be nice if we could see those.
I do agree.
And I know you've got too much to do there, but somebody that could just write it on newsprint or something would be very helpful.
Well, a whiteboard. Well, most of the time where you're doing a strategy session or a goal setting session, you have somebody up there with the whiteboard jotting those things down, big sheets of paper and sticking them up. And so that's a point well taken. We'll see if we can wrangle someone for the next time. I don't know. I don't even know if we have a whiteboard in here or any of that butcher paper. So I don't know that we're able to do that. I will, like I said, rewatch the meeting, so I will get all of these notes out to you in preparation going into the next one.
Who is taking notes? Molly took them last time.
She took her own. Those notes I did by rewatching the video.
As we get to enforcement, I think Molly is gonna be a key participant here.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think a goal has to be to address some of the fire life safety and just safety goals and neighborly concerns as an overall goal. Community concerns. I mean, we're kind of breezing past this kind of overall goals, but this is what our community is saying, and we have to establish it.
And maybe one of the goals could be referring back to the survey and trying to address as many of the community's concerns as possible. And that's pretty broad, but it gives us some options to try and make some progress with what the survey said.
Yeah, and so the intent was to, like I say, get a few, but then look at that survey and look at what the community was saying and be able to hit all those topically instead of dancing all around. We're dancing all around in kind of the general mode. But if we can have real specific discussions on each topical area, like environmental and safety and the numbers and different things like that, we have one or two of them listed tonight, and then when we enter into that discussion, we get more goals kind of established. Like this isn't, we're not putting 3 in there and then closing the door, no more goals. It's we go on to deal with more specific or pointed goals specific to the areas that we're talking about. Does that make sense?
Along with that, is it John? Along with that, a friendly amendment might be something in the way of community public relations or community information, whatever it's called. Because as I talk to people, there's a lot of buzz, And if there was some way of, I don't know what it is, and don't give me another website, just something to communicate to stakeholders and interested people, the good things that are going on. It's paying for administration. Or, geez, we've got a great poster child for vacation rental. They follow all the rules all the time. That kind of thing. And I think that might be important at some level.
Okay, so again, looking at the list, I got 3 specifically down. Were you forming another one, a 4th one, John? Is that what you were trying to dovetail in?
I mean, I'm just throwing it out there to see if that's the line that you're thinking. I mean, we do need to get moving on. I don't want to delay things, but
Yeah,
I do think we need to
Sounds like
keep.
a lot of this is falling into minimizing like adverse impacts on neighboring property owners, which wasn't technically fall under the environmental.
But the community overall.
I guess that was what I might have missed, but what I thought I said was to neighboring communities, which also my thought was that is including that, not just the neighbor, but the community. So it would include the housing, it would include the, what are the impacts to the community?
That gives us some options to go down on
Yeah,
that.
so we can go down that road as far as without saying the neighboring communities.
Sure. So if we expand that into number 2, that kind of covers that. So were there any other ones that you want to throw out from a general perspective, understanding the fact that as we go on, we are going to be throwing more goals and such out as we get each time. Okay, and again, I'll get the notes out. I'll have this all covered going into the next meeting, and certainly be able to have comment or the ability to comment or say, no, that's not what we're talking about. So the next thing is the impacts on housing. What are the impacts and how can we quantify them? And I was kind of hoping that obviously the 2 main folks in the committee that are able to speak to that is Jason with the HRA and then Bob. So I know you had a presentation, but is that something that's in line with this right now, or is this?
I have a presentation that I put together that I think will help shape some of Like, you know, I get requests from people that want to know how many of the vacation rental owners are locals, how many of them have a local mailing address. Other questions about how many units are there, how, you know, all the data is always gonna be a little bit different, you know, the assessor's office. We look at January 2nd of every year. I'm not scanning this thing every other week like we were back in 2018 before we had host compliance. So I'm looking at the numbers, and you know, when I put together a spreadsheet, I'm giving a parcel count of parcels that have short-term rental classification. The unit count can be totally different. I know we have some parcels that either through permitting or whatever means, they have 3 or 4 units on one individual parcel. So numbers and why they differ, why they vary, why host compliance has a different number than what the assessor says, and you know, in the bigger picture, part of what I had put together in a PowerPoint was showing that, you know, that I think that there is a little bit of a misconception on the impacts of housing. I actually studied Aspenwood, is a development down in Lusitania area, and 7 units that have sold in the last few years. 5 of the 7 were short-term rentals all the way up until their sale. And now only 2 of the 7 are short-term rentals. The rest that were, you know, the highest bidder of those properties is using them as a capital. They're using them as a second home, and they're sitting there with no other activity other than somebody coming up, you know, whether it's every weekend or once a month. So, you know, looking at the concerns that came through in the initial survey from the general community and some of the concerns of members of the committee, I looked at it and saw, well, we've had 1,300, a little over 1,300 sales in the last 3 years, study periods that we've done. And the number of vacation rentals has changed by 1 in my data queries from 2019 to 2022. The parcels that have been classified as short-term rentals has decreased by 1 since 2019. So, you know, in a study of 1,300 sales, I don't think that we should conclude or, you know, people maybe have a misconception that all of the housing is being absorbed into short-term rentals. Now, obviously, anything that's happened since, you know, January 2nd, I'm not on top of it yet. I mean, that's the newest changing properties. I'm aware of a couple of myself where the previous occupant, they were full-time occupants. I know a guy who moved out to Wyoming, sold his house, and the new owner is going to be doing a short-term rental there in Woodson. So there are cases of it, but at the same time, there's cases of short-term rentals that have sold, and now they're being used as a second home. I put together a flyer for our Fisherman's Picnic handout, and you know, 6,500 parcels roughly that are approved with some type of a structure in Cook County. About 20% of them are homestead. It's like 18 point some percent are homestead. That's 1,900 properties. Well, so the percentages of value. There's 1,900 properties that are homesteaded. That's about 18% of our taxable value. 38% roughly was for second homeowners, cabin owners. And then it was like 19% somewhere in the ballpark for rental properties. That's going to include apartments, the long-term rentals and short-term rentals. So all of that gets pooled into residential non-homestead for classification purposes. And I think that from my perspective, the housing stock is equally as impacted by somebody who's using it as a cabin. Now, imagine trying to go in and telling a cabin owner, you can't use this as a cabin because it's hurting our housing stock. So any real estate agent in the room is going to agree with you that property rights are the most fundamental right in the United States of America. You have the right to use your property the way you want to use it. Local governments have police power. We can put some restrictions in as long as it's not impeding on somebody's constitutional rights. I actually had a little bit of discussion with Tim because I've done so much research on the short-term rentals back in 2019. In Minnesota, there was a case in Winona. It's Dean versus Winona. You can Google that and it'll pop up. It made it all the way to the Supreme Court. The Court of Appeals upheld that the city of Winona can restrict the number of rental units on any given block or a subdivision. They made a really good argument. The Supreme Court decided they would take it on. And before the Supreme Court made a decision, the property owner sold the property and they threw it out. They said that the case was moot. So, you know, cities like Duluth have ordinances that restricts the number of rentals. And that's going off of that Court of Appeals, the Minnesota Court of Appeals decision that was within their constitution, that their police power allowed them to do that. You know, depending on the county attorney and Tim, you know, putting restrictions on these things has a risk of, you know, eventually getting escalated back up to that Supreme Court level. And if you lose something like that, then you have to undo everything you've done. But
Excuse me, but then two things. I wondered how much control we would have over our purview relating to housing. Maybe there is some, I don't know, it escapes me. But then Court of Appeals, there was a decision on that then? Did
Yeah.
that specify what governmental unit would be able to or not? I mean, is a city, county,
in that case, it was city. It was the city of Winona.
city?
Yep, so I think that the county and cities have similar policing powers. I know a lot of times when this discussion has come up as far as what should be done, a lot of times, you know, I think the opinion is that the state should be implementing some basic guidelines. The state of Wisconsin has some state level guidelines for short-term rentals. All Minnesota has is the Department of Health regulations. But what I was hoping to get, you know, what I want to do is create this dashboard that's very similar to host compliance. We have one for tax forfeit properties. So what I do is I load a spreadsheet full of whatever relevant data, whatever everybody wants on this dashboard. And we can actually have a GIS map where you can click on one of these advertised or rented properties. It'll show you, you know, what's the assessed value, what was its most recent use, when did it last sell? Whatever we feel like is important to the discussion, we can put into a dashboard. And this will not be, it'll be something that I'll have to maintain. So as things change, we'll have to add or remove properties from this. It's static, it's not dynamic, it's not going to update automatically. Mailing addresses will have to be updated and things like that. Things that change will have to be updated in the spreadsheet, but essentially we want to build, I want the information that people are looking for, that people are desiring, so that I can put this dashboard together. And I think you guys will find it a very valuable tool. It'll show you exactly throughout the county where these properties are. You can click on the link to, or you can click on the you know, marker for this unit. And within that, there will be a box that opens up, and I can include the link to the VRBO app. So, you know, that's another thing that, you know, I have all these ideas, but I'm just wondering if there's anything that maybe I haven't considered that we want to add to this dashboard. We can make it public, or we can, you know, leave it to the committee.
I mean, I think more information can get out to people, I don't know, because I do think there's some misperceptions about it, I think, right? Your PowerPoint, does that have all the data that you just went through?
It doesn't have the data, no. The data of the 1,300 sales and the number of short-term rentals over the 3-year period going down.
Could we get that just so that we can?
Yeah, I could share that. And then for each one of those Aspenwood units, I gave the address and the sale date, sales price, and what it was before, what it was now. You know, in that small case study, more properties are being sold for cabin use than short-term rentals.
So and you just said that as of January 2nd, there was a net change of 1.
From 2019, January 2nd, 2019 to January 2nd, 2022, using the parcel count.
Sure.
It's gone down by 1. And
I
that includes
understand
all of the
that you might
resorts.
have more rentals on one parcel, you know, 2 rentals on a parcel, right?
Right, yeah.
So I mean, in essence, with the 3 or 4 that you're getting every week, is that then they're washing out, there's some dropping out, and there's some
Yep,
some
I know.
adding, and it just nets out over the last 3 years as having just
Yep.
changing 1.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there are investors who have been trying to sell for many years, and now that we're at a peak in the market, they're seeing this as an opportunity to get out of, you know, holding those rental properties. So the next person who comes along, the highest bidder may not be somebody who's enrolling that in a short-term rental. We have a state lawmaker who bought a property up here. They're not going to rent that thing on a short-term rental. It's their second property that they come up for vacations. So, you know, there's a lot of data that I can share. Now, we can't get too far into the weeds where a lot of this stuff isn't something I can pull out of the system, like, you know, looking at a property's changes in classifications, how many years back do we want to go? I started putting together a list going all the way back to 2008 of where in 2008, this property was a homestead. And in 2008, it changed, or 9, it changed to a short-term rental. It's been that ever since. So, you know, we can, you know, we have to set our parameters of what we think is relevant, because the more we're asking of me, then that's more it's stuff that I have to go in and manually do. It can't just be extracted from the data in the computer.
And I think to the point, it's good to make sure that we've got
Do you know,
cost of that.
do you know what you call short-term rentals were licensed? You know, for a fact, if what you're calling short-term rentals in your system are licensed, because there may be both.
So I know of operations that are not licensed and they are classified as short-term rentals.
Yeah.
So we've kind of done our own thing and used host compliance to ease some of the burden on classifying these. So with that, you know, in fact, interestingly enough, there's a property that's not compliant with our ordinance. It does not have a license. And just on a whim, I sent a message to Airbnb and said, hey, there's an operation in our jurisdiction that's not compliant with our local ordinance. And they said that that's not compliant with Airbnb's rules, and that they were going to contact the host and let them know that they needed to become compliant if they wanted to continue to advertise. I don't know if VRBO or, you know, all the other HomeAway, there's a million different platforms. I don't know if they're all going to be as cooperative. But the problem with this nationwide is that Airbnb will never tell you where the rentals are. That's privacy, it's private data. They're not going to share that with you. But if you go to them and say, hey, we know of this one and it is not compliant with local ordinance, they will shut it down.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of a, you know, hopeful.
Just a comment on what you said in the last 10 minutes. You have data, that's fact. And it really, too much information can be confusing. But you know what we need to know. And some of the information you just reported, I think is very relevant to our knowledge base.
Yeah. And then, so before, we could probably almost close out this section, but so lastly, you know, one of the concerns that I saw a number of times in the countywide survey of the 500, 600 people was the impact on affordable housing. So I don't know where you draw the line of what's affordable in this community. You know, I have a previous loan officer that works in my office, and just using the median home value that we use for our compensation study was $295. We're probably at $350 now. The median home price of $295, if you had no other bills, you have to be making, you know, $27 an hour to afford that property at maxing out your debt to income on just the home. You can't have any other debt, no credit cards, no car loans, anything. So, you know, $27 an hour to afford the median. So let's just say that's considered affordable. I don't think most people in the county make $27 an hour. A lot of people don't. So if that's what you need, looking at all the properties I have classified as short-term rental under that median, I think there's less than 15 that were converted from residence to a short-term rental. A lot of these under 300,000 have been built. There's actually a whole bunch of them that are less than 300 square feet. They have no running water. They're literally just little bunk houses. Lonnie DePree built a number of them. They were vacant land before they ever became a short-term rental. And there's only very few houses that I would consider year-round with running water and all the utilities that a person would expect in their home. That converted from being a home to a short-term rental. Now, I have not done any research on this properties within the city of Grand Marais. We obviously don't have jurisdiction on it. So I've actually started putting together a spreadsheet. And I think I'm about 6 properties away from hitting 300,000, the median home price of Cook County. And there's really not a lot of them that were.
Okay, Bob, so if you can get the information to Tim and then send it out.
Yeah, and
What
if
you think
any,
is important.
yeah, and if anybody has a specific data point that they want, either shoot me an email or just let me know right now, and I'll try and add that into the dashboard.
Good.
This gentleman here had a question. Just a minute, Hillary.
I have two questions for Jill. Do you know how many licenses there were at the end of last year compared to what there are now? You remember?
I can tell you in just a second because I've got it right here. So in 2021, we had 238 properties licensed. In 2020, we had 203. So it went up by 36. And this year, we're up to 267. Now, does that mean that people were non-compliant and are now coming back into being compliant? Or does it mean there's actually new units? And one point I want to make, and Bob probably realizes this, there are people that are constructing what we would call rustic cabins, specifically for the purpose of using them for vacation rentals. Steve, you might want to comment on that.
I still got to see your water system.
But this is not, there are several people that I know of that are doing these, and they're licensing them. But they're not, that's creating new housing specifically for a purpose of short-term rentals and not taking away housing from, affordable housing, as Bob would say.
You have another question?
Well, I just, this data that I get every month from this Explore Minnesota, you could all probably get this data too. It keeps saying how every month, year over year, the number of listings is increasing. And you're saying it hasn't. And so I'm just curious how this company is getting that data and it doesn't jive at all with what you have.
Listings is a very specific word. There may be a property that 2 years ago, they were only advertising on Airbnb, and now they're seeing that HomeAway and VRBO.com are other options. In fact, our host compliance dashboard, I think it says there's like 600 listings, and only 264 of them are actual independent units. Some properties are only advertised on one platform, some are on 3 or 4, and that might be shifting and changing throughout the months as people. In fact, there's a commercial right now that's for VRBO.com, and it says if you're advertising on Airbnb, you're missing a huge clientele. You'll see that commercial if you watch some of the home improvement channels.
Hillary?
Yeah, so the question I have, Bob, you asked the question about what data would be useful if you were developing. One of the tools that I would wonder about is having the availability for a public to look at a property. Because, for example, I just had a property that I turned into, Joseph, that a couple of the residents said, they're using it as a VRBO. Here's their website. It's listed as homestead. And part of the issue that I heard very early on was saying, we really don't know what we don't know. I mean, you can't argue from that position. And so if public had a way to do that, I had no idea that we had an unlicensed VRBO up here. But the residents did because of the noise that they were dealing with. And they actually sent me the website for the VRBO, and I was able to send it over to Joseph, and he confirmed that. So if the public had access, they could be the eyes and the ears in the communities that the bots are missing. And I think that would be a really useful tool, given that we've talked about how is that we find these properties in addition to what's being already found, because there are things that do, come through the cracks, and it just is. So if that data was public, then people could help and, send an email to whomever and say, here's the website for this. It isn't listed on your whatever.
Thank you, Hillary. Steve?
Just commenting on the data from AirDNA, they're not a super accurate source. We get calls in our office on a regular basis where people are thinking about buying property and they're using AirDNA as the source of the data and how they're thinking about running the numbers to find the property. And we're able to track those numbers back to properties that we manage, and the ADR numbers that AirDNA publishes for listings that we're extremely familiar with are not accurate and don't track to reality is. So, people are gonna get themselves in trouble if they're believing their data and buying property, so I would just be very careful of that particular source.
Are you familiar with STAR reports?
I don't.
So that's in the hotel business, which is very similar to what this report is. And it's pretty accurate information.
Does the STAR report on Cook County? I thought they ended up.
It doesn't do it Cook County specifically, no. So their DNA is something totally different.
We've done a lot of analysis of air DNA too, and what it basically does is it takes the average advertised calculated rate, and any of those nights that it's blocked off, let's say an owner comes and uses their unit for a month, they're gonna show it as occupied and calculate it at that average advertised ADR. So, I mean, I would even go on what Steve was saying, it's saying that it's inaccurate, it's grossly inaccurate.
And STAR is more accurate, is it just truly from the chains, it's the rate, so it really is what we charge. And that sort of thing, so.
Cook County actually did have an air DNA account for, I don't know, 6 to 8 months or something like that. We're kind of using it for preparing for some of the court cases when we classify the properties commercially, just to see how they're tracking. And I didn't really find that a useful tool. I do think it's kind of a gimmicky site that, you can actually go in and punch in any one of your addresses. It's going to ask you your square footage and how many bedrooms you have. And then it's just going to spit out a number that, is probably going to look real nice. It's going to make you think that you're going to make a ton of money on the VRBO. It doesn't, I don't think it counts for management expenses and things like that. Unexpected.
One thing, this is changing subjects a little bit, but in conversation, somewhere I picked up vacation rentals, assuming they're licensed and short-term and all that, who don't meet a certain threshold have different tax bases. Like, is it below 10 or 14 a year, 14 rentals a year? That I think is relevant, certainly relevant to revenue for the county.
Yeah, so I'll let you know what I have listed for my dashboard, and also taking into consideration that idea for a public portal. So property location, how many parcels we have, how many units there are within those parcels, the estimated market value, the property tax classification current and history, a link to the advertisement, whether or not it's licensed with the county. So, we can go in, and anyone in this committee or the public at large can go in and see, is this property classified for tax purposes correctly? Is this property licensed with the county? And, they can see what it's valued at, what it's assessed at. Owner mailing address is something that's public information on our GIS website. I figure I'd just include that. And then, I was leaving it up to the committee to give me any additional ideas for this dashboard portal, which I think everyone will find really useful.
Just a point of information on that subject, though, do you know, or could you approximate how many of our vacation rentals, short-term rentals are paying, let's see, how would it go? Are paying homestead versus non-homestead? And, that ratio would be useful to know.
Yep, so that will also be included, whether or not they're renting just like a room or a basement or an entire house.
Are these casual?
There's not very many homesteaders that are renting out sections of their house, very few in Cook County. And in fact, I don't think, do they require a license if they're just renting a bedroom in a house?
Well, then just to answer that, we get people that want to close out a basement or so, and we would determine that to be a unit. Problem being that if you convert a basement into a unit and close that out, it becomes a duplex, which is a conditional use permit in the residential zone district. So it becomes more complicated in that sense. And we are only about 5 minutes left in the meeting. I wanted to try to give Jason a chance to speak as well.
I'll be very, we have 5 minutes, so quick. I think it's not playing the devil's advocate, because I hear, and I totally appreciate, actually agree, whatever that means, that the lion's share of the issue is, as far as the community's assumption about how many units are actually being used, how many livable, affordable units are being used for vacation rentals is less than the perception. And that there's a much bigger issue of, if you want to call it issue, and Bob, you're speaking to this, of property owners who buy second homes and they're vacant for X months of the year. fact, census.gov has an interesting, we have a housing summit in a couple of weeks, and I'm gonna be showing a little bit of it. You can go in by both census tract and sub-census tracts and look at how many units are, how many of them are vacant according to self-reported census, which is just an interesting thing to see. Of course, you go up into the gun front and you see 20 units, 15 of them are vacant or not, full-time residents. So just, if you want to go putz around on census.gov, you might be able to find it's just interesting to cruise around the county and look at that. Having said that, I want to make sure to mention that while it is the case that there aren't that many single-family homes that would be deemed affordable, and I could happily talk about what that means, depending on if you talk federal government, local, state, it's median household incomes, there's a whole bunch of parameters. But the point is, there's 267 permits right now, is that the right number? Which is about 5% of the housing stock in the county. Every time, and I'm not trying to make a value statement here, it's just kind of an objective fact. Every unit that's pulled off of that would be considered affordable or not affordable. It's used, it could be a single family home with utilities, that's access to amenities and whatever. That does have an impact, however marginal, on the availability of housing stock. And every time one of those sells, there's downward pressure that increases the cost of every other unit. So, and again, it's not an astronomical amount, so I'm not saying we're in this crisis. I'm just saying we should keep in mind that just because not most of them are being used that way, every time one does sell, so we're thinking about potential permit caps or what the right amount is, and again, I'm not advocating working together right now. But we should keep in mind that every single housing unit does put pressure on the other available inventory, which drives prices up. I mean, the median house sale in Cook County in May was $420,000, which is like 200,000 higher than it was 3-4 years ago. And I'm just saying, every time one sells, it increases the pressure. So keep that in mind when we're talking about general impact on housing market. That is something we should think about. Doesn't mean we have to change or cap it.
I really quick on that and what Joseph had said too, about like some of the small structures and they're maybe not hooked up to what people think of as like what you need. I mean, I can think of when I've been here for 21 years. I think I lived for the first 10 years hauling water until we had our first kid need water. We're like, okay, that's not bad. And so like, and I think of my friends that were still here and like that's like the shuffle of like, okay, if you're going to get in here, that's a lot of people that start out that way. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that start that way. So if those little things are, again, it's cost of land, it's cost of that, but it's like it's a way in. If those little shacks that we found and we're able to kind of weasel our way into are still like that's more romanticized to be able to rent out for whatever it is, right there. That does have an impact.
And just one last quick note, I think it's in my mind, it's a different story when someone buys a piece of raw land and builds something for that purpose. Like there's a net gain and they're not taking away from existing housing stock. They're building something new. That seems different to me than something that potentially could be used for a resident or something. So just.
Hey, Tim, you can wrap it up.
Okay, thank you. A lot of good discussion. Obviously, there's a lot of information that is out there. Bob is going to be putting information together for handouts. Everybody likes to have homework and preparation for the next committee meeting. There are issues or topics we didn't get to on the agenda. So what I intend to do is get the information from Bob, and then just at this point, ask you guys to look at Articles 4 and 5, along with 2, the definition. We started talking about the definition of vacation rentals at the first meeting. I want to continue talking about that definition, but we should start hitting some of the real topical issues and get some of the kind of the hard discussions underway. It is important, and I'm glad that we did this, for everybody to have as much information as they can have to make the good decisions and to make their comments known and such. So I think it's okay that we did have a lot of discussion and a lot of opening. I talked with Bob about some of that information, but not to the in-depth that he went over here. I was watching him flip through the PowerPoint. There's a lot of good information on that. So that's good. And I guess what we can do too is have, if there's any specific information, I know some people did that, but if there is any specific information that some people would like, get that to us, and then we can funnel that out either to Bob or Joseph
Jason or somebody and make sure we get that out ahead of time. And so by mid-week here, hope to have the notes done and the kind of agenda put together, kind of for the next meeting. Now, I gotta say real quick, Madam Chair, if I can. It's the 15th.
15.
It's the 15th, it's set for that. I've got an issue that came up on the 15th. So it would be difficult, so you could have Bob, Joseph.
Can we do anything besides Mondays?
And that was gonna be my question, just at least for this next one. Is it possible to do the 16th on that, still within that day? Or what else?
Mondays are really difficult for me and Mike Roth. He hasn't been able to attend those.
I think it's really good. I mean, the amount of attendance that we have with the regular members, like darn near 100%. So that's been really good. We've got 2 meetings under our belt, and we've had really good participation. And same with the gallery. It's impressive. So what are some thoughts about the next meeting?
Anybody not
How
available?
many meetings after that?
Well, we had decided to kind of go every other week, and we had picked the Mondays at that point because that was working out for folks, for most of the folks. And then it worked for me as well. I think we got like a maximum of 4 after that.
You're proposing start Tuesday, the 16th, is that what you're?
I'm proposing Tuesday the 16th, at least just for this next one, and we could think more, discuss it. I know Bob was right. Mike Roth did make the comment to me that he can't make it on Mondays.
Same time, same time.
Same time.
That work for almost everybody?
What about the 17th?
It's Wednesday. That might be our planning commission board of adjustment.
That's on the 10th.
It is the 10th, so 17th would work.
I've got to see. I don't know.
Yes, this is what we ran into last time.
So the HRA actually meets in this room on Wednesday, the 17th.
Yeah, sorry. That's.
What does that leave you?
Well, I guess we can go for the 15th and either I'm here or I'm not.
Be nice to include the city when we could. There's no guarantee that will
You
come.
have it.
They have Anton, yeah.
I agree.
If you did it the 5th, well, can we send out another doodle poll and try to find the time? Because it's probably difficult on everybody's calendars to look at like, hey, what are we doing in the next 2 weeks? If you weren't able to do it on the 15th, there's like, is Bob a backup or sort of, could somebody assist with stepping in or something to help facilitate it? I'm trying to.
We can all be replaced. So it's, somebody can be able to. Okay, so I'll do that. I'll send a poll out to see how we're doing. If we can coordinate any other time. If not, then we'll stick to the 15th.
Is the entire 15th off your availability?
Actually, no.
I was just wondering earlier.
Earlier in the day, in the afternoon, started at 3. That would be okay.
I'm gonna have a really upset partner if we keep doing Mondays.
Is 3 okay on the 15th? Okay,
Okay.
so it is said, so it shall be.
15th at 3.
And we will have our audio visual completely going before that.
I think I'll actually have that dashboard up and running too, so I think that's literally just as soon as I get a spreadsheet put together, I send it over to GIS.
Well, I'll send you a cleaned up list. With all my chicken scratchings and everything. So you have- Identify the properties, everything will have PID numbers, addresses.
Hillary?
Hillary?
Oh, she said goodbye.
Oh, goodbye. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, thank you.